So I was super excited about making this video. I tried out a Panasonic S5ii a while ago, and it was one of the easiest, most video-centric hybrid cameras I had ever tried. I wanted to keep it, but autofocus was important to me at the time, especially for a B/C cam. So I just completely forgot about Panasonic, and then this camera came out. I quickly hopped on it because I remember the feeling that I had when I did shoot with that Panasonic camera. In this video, we're gonna go through several different reasons why I made that decision and why I don't regret it at all. The R5C is a powerful camera, but honestly, it doesn't make sense for the camera just doesn't make sense to me, to be honest. I'm not saying the R5C is terrible, but for what it is, for how much it costs, for what you need to do to get it working well and right, it just doesn't make any sense. But anyways, I want to show you a quick little cinematic sequence that I got with the S5 II. It's nothing crazy. I didn't really have anything specific to shoot. I just shot my cat around the house, but I was able to use my favorite feature of the S5 II and the main reason why I bought it, and it's not autofocus. All the shots you're about to see were shot with the S5 II, an anamorphic adapter, and Contax Zeiss vintage lens. So all of it was manual, and yeah, enjoy.
Love me, love me, love me, love me, love me, love me. Try to see who you're meant to be. Are you afraid of light? Are you afraid of light? Speak easy and depend on me. Relieve their minds, oh relieve their minds.
I hope you like the little sequence of my cats. I wish I had something more interesting to film right now, but I really wanted to get this video out as soon as possible. After putting that footage into the editor and editing it all, I was super impressed. I was expecting a ton of compromises when it comes to image quality compared to the R5C, but that wasn't the case. This isn't a direct comparison of the R5C. I'm just sharing my initial thoughts. So I didn't do any dynamic range tests or all of that, but I've played with the R5C footage enough to know that the difference in dynamic range really isn't a lot. I can tell a little bit with the highlights how I don't get as much information, but they're extremely close. And for a close to $5,000 camera, that says a lot. A huge reason why I bought the Panasonic and it's replacing the R5C is its battery life. The R5C has terrible battery life. It actually doesn't make sense why Canon made this camera. I don't get it. I get that you can use PD and use power banks, or you can put a battery grip and make it twice the size. But at that point and at that price point, you might as well buy the C7D. There's more dynamic range, there's internal NDs, good preamps, much better everything, and basically the same price. So it doesn't really make sense to me why Canon made this camera. I got it thinking, oh, it's smaller, but it's still a cinema camera. I could get cinema quality, but for it to actually be usable longer than 40 or 60 minutes, I have to rig it up, and that's not the point. The S5 II, on the other hand, I do not have to do any of that. I specifically have my B cam stripped down. I didn't want to rig it up. I want it to be usable straight out of the box and just grab it, run and go, grab shots, B-roll, whatever I need on the go. Which leads me to my next point, and it's the IBIS in this camera. It is so incredible. It is so good. Half the time I don't need to use a gimbal. Keep in mind, I do use gimbals when the client requests it or when there are specific shots that I'm moving for a really long period of time. Then I'll pull out the gimbal begrudgingly and use it. But for most of the things that I shoot, I just need a little bit of motion, and this camera is amazing for that. This is the best IBIS, hands down, of any camera that I've ever used. And the R5C doesn't even have IBIS, so that completely ruled that camera out. So that one feature alone solved a problem for me and made my life easier. And that's why we buy gear, to solve problems, make our life easier, and make beautiful images. And if you're doing this professionally, to make money. And I know there are people out there that are like, IBIS sucks, don't use IBIS, whatever. Rig up your camera, make it super heavy so you can get out the micro jitters. And I get that. It really isn't logical, but I get it. But the R5C is a tiny camera, and Personally, I see that camera as staying a tiny camera, not a camera that you need to rig up to use. Like I said, the C70 is just a much better option off the bat if you want to rig it up and that's your goal. But that's enough of that. Let's move to the next reason. I mentioned this at the beginning of the video when I used the S1H, but truly that was one of the greatest experiences using a hybrid camera for video. I know the R5C has that C for cinema and it's supposed to be a video-centric camera and all of that, but after using it, I had more headaches with it than my R5 or just different other mirrorless cameras that I used. This camera just had everything I needed, and it seems like Panasonic was making a hybrid camera that they were aiming to be a cinema camera. So it is video-centric and it doesn't have those like quirks that the R5C had being a cinema camera. Literally, the R5C had two separate operating systems. They had the cinema menu and then they had the photo menu. I don't know what they were thinking, but there's like certain features that I can't use on the cinema menu that I can use on the photo menu and vice versa. One being that I can monitor my image wirelessly for taking photos, but then when I switch over to the cinema menu, I can't monitor my image wirelessly unless I buy an attachment. So there were a bunch of hurdles that didn't make sense, that shouldn't have been there, that the S5 II just doesn't have, or at least I haven't experienced that yet. Keep in mind, I've only used this camera one day, but I love it. And before moving forward, I want to briefly touch on image quality. This really isn't one is better than the other, although the dynamic range on the R5C is just a hair to my eye better than the S5 II. I noticed that the highlight roll off is super soft and smooth, but it has like this crunchiness. I don't know, it's kind of hard to explain, but it looks great. I'm actually shooting on the C70 right now. For this next portion of the video, I'm going to switch to the S5 II so you can see the actual image quality in this controlled environment. All right, so this is my first time using this camera for YouTube or setting it up in a controlled lighting environment, and honestly, the first time I set it up and looked at the actual image just with this exact same set, it actually put a smile on my face. I wish I would have just recorded. All right, so I need to apologize. I accidentally left the default sensitivity, which was on high, and did not change it to face and eye detection. So throughout the video, you'll notice that it focuses on my hands a lot. I apologize. This is not the S5 II's fault. This is completely my fault. It is what it is. I'll try and add B-roll and shots of what I'm talking about so it won't be too distracting from the content. And for those that stuck around, thank you. And let's get back into it. But that just goes to show how this camera can stand up even to C70 image quality. The dynamic range is not there, but it's still really good. Now for the next thing that actually makes me laugh at the R5C is the fact that it has a micro HDMI port. The camera costs so much money and is labeled as a cinema camera and still has a micro HDMI port. This $2,000 camera has a full-size HDMI port, which should be standard, but for some reason it's not in the industry right now. It streamlines everything, it's much more reliable and makes my life easier. That was something I did consider and made me decide this camera over the R5C as well. And the last reason why I decided to choose this camera over the R5C is that it can shoot 6K open gate. The R5C can't shoot anything open gate. This feature is so useful for so many reasons. If you've seen any reviews on this camera, you already know that you can repurpose this footage to shoot 16:9 vertical wide video, as well as vertical video for Instagram Reels or anything like that. This is an extremely useful feature and can save so much time in post. You don't have to reshoot different things and go through all of that hassle of trying to put things on different platforms, or having a super zoomed in image that just looks weird and way too intimate. But the main reason why I'm excited about this feature is because I love shooting with anamorphic lenses. The fact that you have that extra vertical resolution means that when you de-squeeze your image, you have much more to play with. It doesn't end up turning into this little sliver like when you usually de-squeeze 16:9 footage. This 3:2 sensor is actually a standard in cinema when shooting with anamorphic lenses. And you can really only find this in a couple different cinema cameras. I know Z-Cam, you can shoot open gate, Kinefinity, obviously the Lumix cameras, the Panasonic S1H and whatnot. But most cameras don't give you the option to shoot open gate, and this is a $2,000 entry-level camera that you can shoot open gate with. So I think this is an extremely underrated feature and isn't just beneficial for repurposing content, even though that's probably what I'm gonna use it for most of the time. I wanna end this video with two last things. I wanna share a non-spec related reason why I chose this camera, more of a feely personal thing. And then I wanna share some of the downsides, because after shooting with it for just one day, I did notice a couple things that I will be missing from the R5C, but not enough to send this camera back, because I really do love it and the extra features are incredible. I want you to keep in mind that this is not my A cam, although I will probably use this for YouTube mostly, and for my B cam on commercials and different things, or when I do bring out the Komodo, it will be my C cam. This is not my primary camera. If this were the only camera that I can have and my budget was in the C70 range, I would buy a C70 over this camera. But that's besides the point of this video. I use this camera for B-roll and for talking heads. So the IBIS, the autofocus, all of these different things make this a much more viable option than the R5C. For me, it really is a perfect camera to just grab and go. The IBIS and autofocus paired together just make it super easy to use. And now for the downsides. If you're someone that switches from 24 frames per second to 60 frames per second all the time, the crop will be annoying. And that's not just because, oh, you're not getting the full frame sensor. You have to reframe, take steps back, do all these different things with your composition because of that crop. Regardless, it's not really a deal breaker. The second thing that I did notice that was kind of annoying, and I'm actually looking at it right now, is there is an HDMI lag. I don't know if that's this specific monitor or if it's the camera. Some people were talking about it. It is a little annoying, but I'm sure if it is an issue within the camera, Panasonic will fix it. From what I've heard, they send out firmware updates all the time to fix issues. So that's something I'm not really used to with Canon and Sony, but I'm not trying to throw shade at different companies, but yeah, it's just not something I'm too used to. But yeah, I can't really think of too much else that I don't like about this camera. It's really good. Obviously, everybody wants everything in a camera, like incredible, whatever. Actually, this has a lot of that stuff. Internal NDs would be great. Full frame 4K 60 would be great. But if you're not needing 4K 60, this camera is an incredible option. Take that for what you will. If you have any questions, please ask them in the comments. I'll be making more videos on this camera. I can't promise I'm gonna make a whole series on it, but if there's something you wanna see specifically, please ask me. I wanna know what you guys want, because I'm not just making these videos to get famous or to get anything. I really wanna help and bring value to this community. So yeah, feel free to subscribe, like this video, do that whole thing, and I'll see you in the next one.